Welcome to section 6, part 4. We're going to continue on with our Teams plugin and focusing on the Teams Manager component. Before we go on to that component, I just got a couple of little things to change. I realized that I was copy pasting this in, but I totally forgot that in the core, we created a base data class which has all this for us. So we don't have to copy this. So all we need to do on our data assets, inherit from that, and then we can that, because that'll already be there. Anyway, there's probably a few other data classes, probably entities ones. Let's have a look. Because I recall doing that a few times, copying that. Oh yeah, the AI data. Yeah, okay. Time goes on, you forget what classes you made. We don't need that. Not a big deal, but made it. Might as well use it. This could actually mess up any. I don't know how much. Yeah, some of these data assets might be corrupted now, so we'll have to check that when we go in. But you got to be careful with data assets, changing them. Definitely while you're testing your game, do not go and make all your data. I guarantee you'll be doing it again as you proceed along and add things to it. It's usually alright when you add just a variable or whatever, but definitely changing classes or anything like that. And the other one I wanted to do was actually in the game data asset, I want to add a variable in here for the available teams, because we're actually going to, so then you can, by game type, so game mode or whatever you're using, you can then determine how many teams are available in that game mode. You know, because if you think of teams, they can also sort of apply to factions or whatever. So if you have a map a game mode that only has certain factions or whatever, you could do it this way as well. But I'm just going to duplicate one of these. It's going to be an array of primary asset. And I'm just going to call it available teams. And then we can assign our team data that we create in here for what teams we want in each game mode. Now, while we're in core, we're going to need, so there's two ways. So when we create our Teams Manager component, it's very similar to the component we created for the loadout manager. If you have a look at the loadout manager, we inherit off our game state, so it's going to be the same. It's going to be a game state component. And if you don't have the game state component, it's just a simple component that gives us accesses. You don't need this, just the actor component, right? So, but if we have a look where this is used, created, and see it's on the entity's game state. So we've created a class and we've put it on. So the issue we have with these plugins as we go, if we have too many, we can't have, so I've got a game state in entities, which is fine because it's got a single link to the core. But now if I put another game state in teams, that means I've got to have a reference to entities because I need to inherit off this game state, so it's all in chain. And I don't want to have that link between the two. That means every time you want to use teams, you'll have to include entities. I don't want that. So I'm going to go through a way of, hey, you can talk to these components, add them to the game state, but not have a link. That's a little bit of stuffing around. The alternative way is to do it in your project. So you'd have in your game state here, you'd just add the component here manually, and then you can just talk to it. That also means when you add teams to your project, that you have to set up that in whatever project game state you've got. Whereas this way, you can just drop teams in as long as you've got core and it's got this interface that we're about to create and it's got the core game state, then it's just all going to work, right? So we'll go back to core. Let me close. In core, under interfaces, we want to create a new one. And we're going to call this the team manager interface. So there's going to be two things. There's going to be team manager interface and there's going to be a team manager component. And what this interface is meant to do is allow anything to find the team manager component and talk to it. So whatever functions we want to use on the team manager externally, what will be in here. And for the moment, this is going to be all the functions we need to apply the team data to, materials and decals and meshes and Niagara and all those things that we did. So sort of going to repeat up a bit here, but it'll be worth it because we won't need that. Let's call it a static reference to the component. And we'll just need a forward declaration for the Niagara component here. Oh, yep, sorry, got to do the API up here. That is all we'll need in here for now, at least anyway. So now let's go back to Teams and under Framework, add a new component here. And I'm just going to call it Manager, Teams Manager. And it's going to inherit from that game state, the core game state. And we'll put it in Framework component. Now this doesn't need to tick, get rid of that. Sorry, just got in the initializer. Added a V in there. So down here in the protected section, we'll add our variables that we're going to need. So we're going to need a map of team data. So the property, and it's going to be by the team ID and the data. And then we're going to need a property which will be replicated, which will be the actual teams that we've created. And that'll be our teams info that we created in the last part. And that's going to include the forward declaration here. We'll just call that teams. And then I'm going to create a private section here as well. And then in here, we're going to use the game phase system to load the teams data and create the teams. So I'm going to have an ID for that. That is going to occur in register. So components have a function called onRegister. You want to override that. When the component registers, it'll then run this. And we've got authority. This is where we need to register for the game phase. So we're going to get a reference to our game state. That included the game state.h up top for game state. And we can get the game state through the world. Actor in the world has a function called state. Hang on. We have a function game state. So that's doing all that work for us. So we can just get game state. And in here, we'll pass the type that we want. Actually, we don't need the cast. So if we got our game state, then we want to register, call or register. And the phase that we will use is this initiate. So we want it pretty early. So later on when we get to doing UI and things like that, you still want the teams created before you get to like the game lobby, so to speak, so players can choose teams. So initiate is where we're going to do it. Always change it later. Delegate for it. And if you haven't watched the rest of the series and you haven't seen this stuff, there's a whole setup on how to register these game phases. The function that we want this to call will just be just on game phase initiate. Call this anything, doesn't really matter. It's a function. And then the rest of the parameters for the actual call or register for game phase is the ID that we just created. So was it load team? Load team task ID. So that's the ID. And then there's just a debug string. Yeah, I'll bring this online. Yeah. And it's telling us there it's a string for the debug. I'm going to do a debug string here. I'm just going to put some info so we can see that the teams are created or when the task is done. I'm sort of just making a naming convention here, so this will be the thing that's doing the task, the game phase, and then what the actual task is. So it's going to be the team data asset. So that's our registration for the phase. Now we need to create that function. Once this phase kicks in, we still want to check that we've got authority. I'll do not has authority. We'll need another reference to our game state. And now we need to get the game data that's running this game so we can get those available teams. Or game data asset, yep, game data. And there's a function on the game state, or game state, to get the game data. I think. Maybe not. Game data. So let's add a getter for that game data. Yeah, we can const referencing that. Const is not going to change the game data. Now we just want to check that the game data has teams. So if there's no available teams, we probably want to throw an error, to be honest. So let's do a check. In the check, we just want to check. Because yeah, the getting to add the teams to like an instance of the game data could happen at any time. Like you might add a new one and just forget to add the team. So we really want to say, hey, you got this. That means not equals. So the way that check will work is if this comes through as true, it won't assert. So if it's not equal to 0, it'll be right. If it equals to 0, then it will assert, or error, play the error. So now that we have teams, I go through them, check that the data's valid. And if it is valid, we want to add it to our team's data. And we're going to add, this is sort of where you create the team ID. And we're just going to use the index of this loop to create the team IDs. If you need specific team IDs, then you could just have it in the data itself. The team ID is really just a reference to the data. So that gives us that link. Once we've gone through this loop, we have a list of teams data, and now we want to go through and load that team data. And I need a reference to asset manager. That should have added the asset manager up the top there. And then we need to create an array of the assets. So this is a map of the ID and the asset. We just want to extract the asset here, and there's a function to do that on maps. And it's just generate value array. So value key is the team ID, value is the team data, value array. And we just need, it wants a variable to output that to. So we'll just check that that's actually generated some teams. We'll go ahead and load our data. Bundles, again, we're not used. Could copy this from wherever, like the loadout manager or wherever we're loading all the data. Same thing. I'm just creating a delegate to kind of fire when the loading's complete. And that's a function we'll need to create there. And we'll load the data with our asset manager. So doing it this way means you only load the team data that's being used in the current game session. So if you have 50 teams, you're not even worrying about the other data that's not involved in, it's not assigned to this game data. Now we don't need to pass, we could pass these team assets through this delegate, but we don't need to. We've got the team's data anyway, so it's all in there. It's just loaded now. So again, just want to check authority. Now there's a few things, so now we want to create the actual team, so the team info, and we also want to assign players to teams, so that each player has when this all kicks off initially, any connected players will have a default team. Like they can change it later, that's fine, but give them a team at the start. And because we don't have a UI and a game lobby at the moment, then they'll just be assigned a random team anyway later on as well. But what we will do first before we do that is we'll just, so this is completed our task now, if you recall. Got this task here and it's completed the task that it needs to do. So we need to tell the game state you can continue on with the next phase. Our task is finished, so we're just going to do that. And on the core game state, register. Yep, register phase task complete, and we just pass our ID. That'll allow the game to continue to the next phase, or when everything else is finished in this phase, it'll go to the next phase. So here we need to do a couple of things. So, or put them into functions, but we need to create the teams. Actually, it would be create teams info. And we want to assign player phase. I might just come back to here, duplicate this create teams and just do create team info. So it's an individual team info. So now we've got our teams data. So that's basically a list of teams that we want to create. So let's use that to create an iterator. So I'll just be the teams data create const iterator. And then here we'll just do create individual one. And so that'll go through and create all the teams, but there's one other thing we want to do, and that's create a default team. So there'll always be an existing team, and it'll also be used for like spectator team or just a no team fallback. So what we're going to do is similar to what we did with so let's go back, have a look at this, because game mode, you come into the sign here. What this does is if it doesn't have a game data, it falls back to creating a default game data, and we've assigned these values so it can find a default game data. Copy this back, just change this to, we don't want to use these values because that's the game data, so what I will do is I'll add that include to the core static game data.h. Open that up. Then we'll change it to data asset type team data, and data asset type default be team data default. Come back to that static here and duplicate both these, change it to team data, and we'll call it DA team data default. Got a good naming convention going there. Close up. So that's that sorted. But then we need to actually create a team from that. So it will just check that oh, hang on. Yep, I'll do. So if that is valid, create a team out of it and do create info. And I just realized that we need to actually pass parameters into this function. So it's going to be team ID, and it's going to need the data that it's creating the team from. So yeah. And that could be by reference. And then, so in here, we can pass the default team. So I'm just going to put it as 255 here. So you could actually grab the default team from the generic team data. If you remember, it would just have to have an include and all that. So it's easier just to do it like that. However, if you ever want to change the default team number, you'll have to remember that this is put in here manually. The other thing you could do is in the either in the game data or in the team data assets themselves, you could have the default team or something like that. Anyway, I know some people don't like the fixed references to the things, so like your code. That's how you get away from that. In this one up here, we need to pass the team ID of the data. Oh, so it would be the key of the map, and this will be the just to explain that. So that's that. So the index from the loop that we created here. This is the index. That'll be the team ID, and the data is the data. So again, we have authority still. We're going to need an asset manager reference here because we're going to cast to the actual data here. So let's cast to our data. Included the H file. Okay. So now we need to spawn our team's info actor. So we're going to have our F spawn parameters, and we're just going to make it so it ensures that it spawns every time. We want to create our team's info. And we can just spawn a generic one because we're not going to assign the data anyway. So go teams info static class and pass our spawn info. Spawn parameter, sorry. So if that's created successfully, now we can start setting the things. And this is where we need to talk to our friend class on teams info. So I'm just going to copy class name for our component to our teams info, and our to do here. I'm going to type friend, and then include declaration for that. Now that gives us access to the team info private variables. So we should be able to go new team info, set team ID. And if you recall, that's in the private section there. And yeah, we're going to do the other one too. So the display asset is the team data. So it's the object of the data asset. So later when we want to get the team display or anything to do with team display, we don't have to do this cast. It'll already be cast to the object. And then we'll add our teams list. And then I mark that as replicated and haven't set up replication. So come back up to the top. In here, I'm like typing that out again. Got the fast rep. Where were we doing that? I was in the info. Include the networking for those teams. And then where we're setting our teams now, do mark property 30 by name. And that should have added the push model there as we use that macro. And that is it for creating our team. So we now have a list of teams. Come back to, and now we can do assign players to teams. Maintain authority. So what I want to do now is build an array of just like the team indexes, or not the indexes, the team IDs, the array of the team IDs. So I call it index. I'll do. So the if we can get that the same way we got the list of data before, so we can go teams data, generate, but it'll be key array this time, ID array. So now that we've got that array, we can use that as sort of like these are the available teams. We're going to need a reference to our game state because we need a list of players. So, and the easiest list of players to get is the player array on the game state. We're going to pull through that. And it just happens to be player states, exactly what we want. Convenient. No. That will return a generic player state, and we want to cast it to our player state, team's player state. So if that's valid, then we need to check the spectator. but we can just check that on the player state real easily. Now, if they are a spectator, we want to assign them to that default team. And you know what? I'm gonna change it. I can't handle the fixed number myself. We are gonna change this to the F generic team ID, and we're gonna assign it no team, which by default is 255, but you can change it. So this will just stop worrying about that ever again. Plus, we also sort of need, it was going to be another fixed number here if we didn't do that. So it's two places. If you've got numbers in your code that you need to change in multiple places, then it's a variable and it's got to go somewhere. So players, their team is always set on the player state. So we're going to set generic team for this player state, and we're going to pass, that exactly what we just, generic team ID, no team. Right. Now, if they're not a spectator, we can go ahead and look at assigning them a team. So here, we're sort of going to hit this code multiple times. We're going to hit it when we load, and we're going to hit it when so we say we get to the lobby, we choose a different game data for our game mode that we're going to play, and then we hit launch and we launch a game. It's going to load this again. So there's going to be two instances here. So one, we need to assign teams randomly, and then the other one is we need to read what the player's team is and assign them to that team. They would have chosen their team in the UI or whatever. So we need to get the player's team no matter what. So their team will be their player state, get team ID. So there's two functions. There's get generic team. So there's the get generic team ID, which is the struct, and then there's just one that's the ID. And you can see here, if there's no team assigned, it's going to equal this no team reference. We've got the team ID. Now we need to check if it has no team. So the other thing we want to check now here as well. So we might have a valid team ID, but there might not be a spot on that team. And then, so we don't want to assign them to that team anyway. So I'm going to create a function for that. And it's going to sound familiar because we did it in the other one. Sorry, full has available slot. I'm going to pass and then we just need to find this team. So our teams. So that is this team, and then we just learn if it has an available slot or not. Created that function already. So we're right to assign this player to this team now, their team ID, and that team does have an available slot. So the way we're going to handle this index array, ID array, keep calling index array. So we need to remove that index. So actually we'll probably assign it first. We're going to create a new function for this, assign player team, and we'll pass the player state and just to keep the code neater, otherwise we're going to end up so deep in if statements. Player to team. Actually, yeah. Forward operation for that player state. Move this, cover all this. Right. Yeah, so we're going to palm that off, that assigned to player team, but then what we need to do is remove that index from the team ID array. We need to remove the team ID from the team ID array. And you can use this function in an array called remove at swap. We're removing the team ID. So what the remove at swap does is it removes this item to the end and then shortens the array by 1. Now, if this has failed for any reason, so team ID is no team or it hasn't got an available slot, then we need to assign the player a random team or whatever fallback you want for this. Well, we need to check that we do have available teams, so that will mean this ID array hasn't just become empty from the last time we assigned someone. And if it has become empty, then there is no teams to assign to, so we're just going to do the no team assign. So here, we're going to need another function here for assign player. Pass the same. No, sorry, hang on. We won't need the team ID because what we'll do is we'll pass a reference to that so we can modify this team's ID array in this function. By reference. Now, before I go on, because I might forget this part here is for assigning existing players to the team. And by existing, I mean they've joined the session and they're playing. And another thing we want to handle is we want to listen for new players. And that's done through the game mode. So I'm going to hit the core game mode. Again, this is a function on our base class. And the game mode has delegate we can listen to, which is on game mode player initialized. And we need to bind a function to that, which, great. And we'll just call it on player initialized for Z. Create that function. And signature of this controller. Alright, so I got some functions to fill out now. So assigning player to team is actually not too different. This, I'm going to copy the available slots function because we need to, if we do pass a team ID, we need to find the team. But here we can assign them to the team. So team, assign team member. And we'll find the team ID on their player state here. We need to pass that by a generic team ID. Easy enough. Now the random team, a bit more complex. So we're actually going to need a while loop here. So while, and while our team's ID array has available slots, we want to try and assign this player to a team. We are going to try and just get a random index for the team. So this is just the random assignment, and do that through the fmath library. So now we have an index of this array that we want to try and assign the player to. I'll check it's a valid index. So then if it's a valid index, then we can get the ID from that, the team ID. I might put some comments in here. So if it has an available slot, we can assign it. If we don't, then we need to keep going with the while loop. So this is easy. We just assign the player to team. Oh. Because this is only assigning one player, we can return here. We don't need to continue with this while loop. If the slot isn't available, then we don't want it in our list anymore. So we're just going to do a remove here as well. If this somehow has a value that isn't valid, we're just unlikely, but we're just going to catch it anyway. I'm just going to break out of the loop. It's just to avoid an infinite loop on the while loop. And then if we do somehow break out of that loop, or we get to the end of this loop with no teams left as well, it'll handle that case. We want to just assign the player to no team. Now, the onPlayer initialized, we want to say, hey, do you have authority? And is the new player valid? If they are all valid, we need to get the player state, and we want to cast it to our type. So to get the player state, it's on the controller, so you can just read it straight off. Oh, I'll put in another one. It's kind of similar to the original themes, because we've got to generate the array and things again, but there's no other way around it. We have to sort of do it for a new player. So I'm just going to call it assign connecting. I'll do that in there. We can't touch that because that's signature to a delegate. Now get the authority. We also gonna need to create the team's ID array. We probably can check if they already have a team assigned. It should be unlikely that they get to here with a player state that's null, but we'll check it anyway. But might have to add that. Anyway, those sort of things that you miss, like I'm passing a player state to all these functions. The assumption that I know it's valid when I use it, but like if you, down the track, if you use this function somewhere else and you haven't checked that it's not null, you're going to get errors. Big time. Crashes. I'm going to come back and fix that up in a sec. So I think what we'll do is if they already have a team assigned, we'll just assign them, because we don't need to do all this crap if they're just assigned. So let's just go get their team. Yeah, kind of name. Yeah. In fact, it's going to be all of this. Teams array. I'd use a different name. Okay. Const. So if it does have a available slot, it'll just assign the team, and kind of done there. Don't need to bother with anything else, and we'll return. However, if they don't have a team assigned, which is going to be the most likely case, to be honest, but we want to just go through and assign the player a random team. Random team function here handles teams that are not available. So any teams that are already taken and full, it'll handle it all. So actually we will make sure we have namers up here. Make sure we've got an actual teams array. That way, if we don't have any teams, we can just assign the null team again. So back to here, we need to implement our team manager interface that we created before in core. So the teams manager interface, include the H, and then all this. I'll put this in a public section of its own. Do my usual events. Overriding. And then all we need to do in here is get the team data that this applies to. They're all going to be similar. We'll make a getter for this. That's going to be it up here. Forward declaration for that. Now we get the team asset from, it's in, so we could cast this, but it's actually in here. So if we come into the team's info, we can actually just do get display asset here, and it's the already casted type for the object. So what we'll do in that function is we'll get the team's info, we'll create a function for that. That'll be a team info name this. Here we can do and yeah, while we're doing getters, I might just add another one for just to get team info. Oh, actually, I'll make it get player. So could do an override there, but I'll keep it separate. And then you just pass in the player looking for their info for. Sorry, that shouldn't be a. That should be an info. Not bad. And in here, I want to get the player's team. And we can do get team info. Actually, we could just probably could validate that this is not a null pointer, but you're just going to return null pointer anyway. The same. Const, let it be const. Down here. And I might actually call it. And then on the display asset, if you recall, that's where we had our functions. We can then pass these onto the respective method of setting team data that it's trying to apply here. So apply to material. Copy this. One will be decal. Yeah, so that's our interface to our team data there. I think that's our team manager component. So it comes in on register, creates the teams, assigns the players, and we've got this array of teams, all the info and the ability to change team data on things, and who's on each team is also in there. So now we need to actually physically create this component on the game state. And the way we're going to do that without causing a connection between our plugins is in our settings, on our core settings, we're going to have the reference here. So you could put this in data and have it as like game state components. So that's how they sort of do it in Lyra. You can add them on the fly, like what, and they make up their sort of their game modes based on what components you add to the game state. I don't want to go that deep into it. So I'm just going to put it in here as a component that you'll need to configure. So I'll call this team settings. And it's essentially just going to be a reference to the class, the team manager component. And because it inherits from our game state component, we can put that here and not create a dependency to our from core to teams. So there only should be a dependency from teams to core, not core to teams. But core doesn't need teams, but teams needs core. Now, if you're creating this in a game state somewhere, like your base class in source, you don't need this part. Sorry, I need you. Maybe a config. So we'll remember to assign that when we go into the editor. And the reason why we can't just, where we're going to create this is do, like the RTS team manager component static class, that should work because we've got no configuration on there, but then you're referencing a teams class and you're going to have that dependency to core to teams that I was just talking about. So this way we sort of bypass it. So now in our core game state, there is a function on game data loaded. Since we need our game data for teams, then we need to wait till the game data is loaded. So in here, I'm going to, before we end this waiting for game data task, I'm going to create the teams component here. We're going to need that reference to the settings we just talked about. We just added the reference to, sorry. Soft pointer, so we're just going to load it and make sure it's valid. What I'm going to do, I'm not going to actually just add the component here. I'm going to create a phase for it to load, game phase task. So I'm going to call that phase, I'll put it here, on team. I'll call it an event, so otherwise it sounds like it's something that's already happened. And now we need to register that. Copy one of these, I want it to be on game phase initiate. And it's going to do this. And we'll need a task ID for it. Game state. I'll do. That'll fire off. Now we will need to get the reference. Actually, I can remove this because I'm not passing any of this, so I can check this here. Sorry. I can just call this. Sorry, register that. Right here. And then we can check it here, so we only have to do that the once, and then we can create the component. So we're attaching it to this, which is the game state. Object source to spawn, and then the name of it will function get. So if that's successful, then we want to register it. And then when that registration is successful, that'll hit our component, and it'll say it'll be it'll do the on register, which is, if you recall, the on register is where we kick everything off. And then whether this succeeds or not, we want to go through and register this task as complete. We don't want to get hung up. We haven't assigned this. Or we could put a log in here, but might be something we would get is to assign the teams manager component to the settings. All right, I think so we've got the component there now, and then outclose some of this stuff. I think I might leave this video here, and then the next video we'll start off we'll start using the component. So we'll look at our player controller and our entities and how they can assign colors and themes and do all the cool stuff. If you're getting something out of this series and you're enjoying it, give us a like and a subscribe, and I'll see you in the next part. Thanks for watching.